Welcome back to another episode of the Corporate Cowboys podcast. My name is Alex, and I'm your host. Today happens to be Thursday, December 1st, 2022. It's a little proof of life for those who know. If you know, you know. Today's episode might be a little short, actually. We've got a question that's coming to us from Reddit, r/career guidance. The question seems kind of straightforward, but maybe we could just provide a professional opinion how a corporate cowboy would approach such a situation. The question asks or provides us with some detail stating, I have 50 days of PTO and potential job offers on the way. Can I work for two companies for a few weeks? Right off the bat, yeah. Unless you've signed some type of contract that's a non-compete or some type of exclusivity, some clause for exclusivity, meaning that you will be working for one company and one company only. You could, there's folks who have 2 or 3, some even 4 part-times, a full-time and a part-time. There was a point in time when I was working, I think 2 or 3 jobs myself. And this was when I lived in a really expensive part on one of the coastal states. I was young, I was in a tight spot, I needed to make the most for myself, so I needed to make the most of my time. And in doing so, I had to hold down one job full time, and any extra time I had to push into another position. It was tough. It was a hard life, but it made me the person I am today. They ask, or they leave some additional context for us in the body of this question, asking about whether they can work for two companies for a few weeks. Currently, they have 50.5, so 50 and a half days of PTO. 20 days are cashed out when my employment ends. So in their employment agreement, apparently it reads that when they do leave, HR authorizes 20 of those days, of those standing days, to be cashed out, delivered to them in their final check. So they have, it says here, so I have 30 and a half days left, or in calendar days, 6 weeks. That's 3 paychecks. I am being asked to submit references for my new role. Okay, so it's not job offers. It's an actual. So they aren't potential job offers. They are actual job offers. And it looks like they're asking for references. That means that they're pretty far in the interview process to just turn back around, right? They've not reached the point of no return, but it appears as if both parties are showing commitment to one another. So they're being asked to submit references for a new role, and it says here, I'm unsure whether to ask my current supervisor to be a reference, since he ultimately is the one who approves whether I get to use my PTO. Okay. Can I work for 2 companies at once and give him a 6-week heads up that I'm resigning while using all 6 of my weeks of PTO? Both companies are hospitals, and I do interact with PHI on a weekly basis. PHI. I'm not sure what the conflict of interest looks like. Again, because you're working in a hospital, I would need to see the employment agreement offhand, whether it's on a contractual basis or if you are an employee on the payroll, but I'm assuming you are. You've got the PTO. dealing with protected health information, private health information, I want to say does create some conflict of interest. So I'm trying to put myself in your supervisor's shoes, where if a subordinate came to me and said, hey, I'm starting a new position, not only would I like you to be a reference, I'm giving you a 6 weeks heads up notice that I'll be leaving. Typically, in my experience, I mean, if you're handling confidential information like that, they would request that you, if they have an inkling, if they have a premonition, if they're privy to you leaving in advance, I've known companies to just tell you to go home then and there, to turn in your badges, any clearance cards, and they would go through any accounts they have of yours as far as communications, as far as access, and other accounts to deny you access in the future, like email, like system logs, and things of that nature. I mean, I can appreciate you wanting to be open. I can appreciate you wanting to be open and telling your manager that you'll be leaving in the future, and that would give your supervisor, your manager, that'd give your supervisor the heads up to look for somebody else, so you don't just surprise them with a 2-week notice, or the day of, just bouncing the day of. Though it's not unheard of. It's a professional courtesy, especially in states that are right to work, or AKA fire at will states. You could just leave the day of. You could start one morning and then go to lunch and just never come back from lunch. I mean, that's a little dramatic. Or lunch could come up and you could just tell your supervisor that you're not coming back from lunch, right? And that's your right. That's your right to do that. You could leave for no cause, for no reason. Unless the contract states otherwise. Unless you are working as an independent contractor and your contract states that. Now, there's nothing wrong with working with two places at once. Again, how that interacts with the hospitals, I would need to see the onboarding documentation, whether or not they require exclusivity from you as an employee to only work for one hospital at a time. I mean, you could have a side gig. You could work at a hospital and then work nights at a grocery store, stocking shelves. I don't see a conflict there, but you bring up a good point working with personal information, with patient information. And that's protected information. That's by law. That's confidential. So a conflict of interest could arise there, though I don't know to what extent or to what degree such a conflict would exist. But yeah, if you could finesse it in a way to start, I think it's just being stuck on wanting your supervisor as a reference. I don't particularly know for what reason. I mean, maybe you don't have coworkers. Maybe you only report to this one supervisor, and they happen to be the only person you report to and the only person you work with. If you don't have other colleagues in the field, colleagues that you can trust, I mean, going to a supervisor, you're essentially showing your cards, essentially showing your hand as to what you have planned, which is to take PTO. I mean, in a perfect world, I would take some of this PTO, start the new job, maybe with 2 weeks left of the 6-week PTO, then give notice to the job I'm at now. But this is assuming that you're not using your supervisor as a reference. I wouldn't get tied down to a supervisor for a reference unless you absolutely trust them and unless you know it's going to go according. I think in order to be sure, you want to read the documents you were given by your current employer to make sure that there is no conflict of interest, so you know how to approach your supervisor. You want to assure your supervisor that they aren't doing anything wrong by being a reference of yours and essentially facilitating you not just taking the PTO because they have to authorize, they have the final authority, they are the final authority in approving it, but that they aren't doing anything wrong by having you work in two hospitals at the same time. You just want to relieve them of any doubt. I think doing so is very professional. That's what I would do as a corporate cowboy. I would be thorough. I would dot my I's, cross my T's, check your P's and your Q's. Stay on them so that you know for sure whether or not working for two hospitals is a viable option, and you effectively could double your income for a short period of time while you transition, and do that through PTO. So you've got the paid time off to take advantage of, and while you aren't working at one place, you're working at another, but still receiving the two checks. I feel like that's the most straightforward answer. We would need a little bit more context as to what the relationship between the employee and the supervisor is on a personal level, on a professional level, and additionally, we would need to see the onboarding paperwork for both hospitals, actually. Again, this is just for the sake of being thorough. If I had this person in front of me, those would be the documents that I would ask for and questions that I would ask. If you will find yourself in a similar position, think about whether or not a conflict of interest exists. And actually think through and read your employment agreement, any written agreement that you would have signed to part of your employee manual, part of your employee handbook, any of the policies and procedures for a place that you work at. If you are interested in a one-to-one, some type of career consultation, I could help you with that. I'm more than happy to. I've helped many others in the past to get a job or get promoted or move up or resolve some type of inter-work conflict. You can find us online on Instagram at Corporate Cowboys with a Z. The Corporate Cowboys podcast on Patreon. There are multiple tiers that you could sign up for. If you want to shoot us some type of DM, you could do that. A donation with the message attached, do it. We can make a video from it. You can include your contact info in there if you would like, if you want a shout out of sorts. The links exist. Snail mail also works. P.O. Box 3372, Rancho Cordova, California, 95741. Now, let me read a couple of these comments, because it being Reddit, I'm sure somebody has a good idea, or maybe even have a better idea, something more reasonable than what I'm suggesting, because I'm trying to not require the client, not require this employee to juggle too many balls at once, not to juggle too many things at once. And it's important that the transition from one employer to the other employer, from one place of employment to the second place of employment, to be as smooth as possible, right? to not be all herky jerky, assuming that the second place of employment is going to be also somewhat long term, enough time to rack up PTO in the future, whether or not they choose to use it. Something stable, for the duration that they're going to be working there. The first comment here says, you will get screwed if you're holding on to that much PTO before giving notice. Start using it now or you're going to lose it. I would agree. I would tend to agree with this, and that's why I suggested not using the supervisor as a reference. I think if the supervisor is given the heads up beforehand, it introduces uncertainty in the supervisor. And the supervisor wants to be as certain as possible. So if they've got 6 weeks of you potentially working for somebody else because, well, they acted as your reference, they're going to want to let you go immediately. I mean, you're not there anymore. And if the supervisor is, if they are technically privy to this 20 days being cashed out when your employment ends, they probably don't give a fuck how much PTO you have. I mean, I'm just being honest. 20, 50 hours, 100 hours, they probably don't give a fuck. If you're telling your supervisor that you're leaving in 6 weeks, they could make that effective immediately. Okay, pack your things. You can go home. We'll have somebody else cover your shift. Leave your badge at the front desk on your way out. I've seen it happen before, but showing your cards early on. That's what I mentioned beforehand. Showing your cards early on may not be the smartest option because it's the supervisor ultimately who approves whether or not you take the PTO. So they could they could essentially pull the rug out from under you for those 30 and a half days, those 6 weeks of PTO. Those 3 extra paychecks, you could be having 3 extra paychecks, and they can effectively cut those down to just the 20 days that you get cashed out. To start using it now, yeah, I would start using it now. If you could find a colleague, have a colleague be a reference. I don't know why it needs to be the supervisor. I mean, if your colleague is a professional and is also capable socially, I think they're more than capable. I think they're apt to give you a good reference as well. But, I mean, if the supervisor is the only person you work with and the only person you report to, I mean, there's nobody else in the hospital, somebody higher level that you interact with on a somewhat regular basis where you could ask for a reference. I mean, I don't know. Explore your options. Explore your options. It doesn't have to be this one person that holds this much power over you. Not just the reference that you want to give in their hands, but the authority to approve your PTO. And if they are privy to your plan, whether or not that PTO will even go through. Just be careful of that. Someone here says, the next one says, you can be a little creative. For example, accept the new offer, but let them know in advance that you have some personal time planned for 3 weeks. Okay, so, I mean, you give a little pretext, a little premise as to your personal time. And at the existing spot, take a 3-week vacation and start your new job. Right when you come back, give your 2 weeks notice. Work those 2 weeks while you're off from the new role. And they say a little unethical, I guess, but worth a shot. I wouldn't say it's unethical. I think you're introducing another layer of creativity here, which I can appreciate if you know how to space out that PTO, right? But then you're only using the 3 weeks of PTO when you have 6 weeks coming to you. Let's see here. I'm trying to think of how to fix that, of how to build on that and make it better. It's just that you already run into problems when you accept a new offer. This is assuming that you've got the second offer and you've got that second job, but you're still in the process of just getting the reference. I'm really stuck on using your supervisor as a reference. I would advise you not to. As a professional, as a corporate cowboy, right? I mean, none of this is legal advice. You do with it what you want. But I would consult. I would consult with you reconsidering using your supervisor as a reference, because you're going to need the supervisor to then sign off and approve your PTO before you effectively leave. And any good supervisor worth their salt is going to want to save the company money, right? If they are up your ass in your business, right? That's if they even know how much PTO you have. But if the operation is pretty tight, I mean, we could assume it's a safe bet that the supervisor is chummy with HR and HR is on top of PTO. So having to approve any of this, if you let the supervisor in on your plans to leave, they could effectively bump up that date and make your departure immediate. This next comment here says, some places will take your resignation effective immediately so that you cannot use any future planned PTO. Yeah, that's that's what I said earlier. That's smart. That's the smarter way to do it, especially if the manager can just save the company money and they could hire somebody else in the meantime to fill in for you while they're in the process of getting somebody else to replace you. And somebody actually replies to that and says this: if it is any sort of competitor, they can walk you out the door instantly, forfeiting any PTO you have. They aren't legally required to pay out to you. Start using your accumulated days ASAP. Yeah. So anything above those 20 hours that they are required to pay out to you on your last check, they could walk you out, like they're saying, and make your departure effective immediately. Save their checkbooks fucking 6 weeks of PTO, especially if you're going to a competitor. Like I mentioned, there might be that conflict of interest. They're working at two hospitals. If this was for, I don't know, some food bank, some grocery store, a cashier at some place, there might not be that conflict of interest where the manager, I mean, I doubt the manager would see your logic in it, but maybe for whatever reason you're taking a cut in pay. I can't see how working at a hospital, how working as a cashier, you would make more as a cashier than working at a hospital. I can't see that. But if your manager is understanding, they'll probably give you those 6 weeks of PTO while you establish yourself at this other spot. That goes back to your personal relationship with your manager, how they treat you and how you treat each other as a colleague and as professionals. But yeah, if it's for a competitor, they might as well tell you to kick rocks as soon as you let them know what you're planning. And you might effectively be burning that bridge for a personal reference. They might be less likely to give you a personal reference if you are not upfront with them about that. Or like I said, if you don't find somebody else to be your reference, play your cards smart, man. Don't get caught up in this bullshit. Another comment here says, definitely do 2 jobs at once. Ignore the people who have been brainwashed by corporate America. It is totally legal. Yeah, I don't think anybody's been fucking brainwashed. This person has something against corporate America when corporate is the next best thing after sliced bread. I mean, let's be real. It's a corporate world order. You gotta fucking play the game. And this person was over here acting like they just discovered fire to do 2 jobs at once, to work 2 jobs at once. 2 more comments. Somebody else is saying, depends on the environment. I used to work for a college, and it was standard practice that people got a new job, they gave notice, they took their vacation that was not paid out, they started their new job, and then took a vacation day from the new job and came back and worked one last day at the college. You see, it just really depends on what the practice is. And that goes back to the relationships that you keep professionally with employers and supervisors and colleagues. As a corporate cowboy, it's in your best interest to be able to shake hands with anybody, right? To be able to work with anybody. Granted, there are going to be some people that you do not want to work with, but if you can't knock them out or dispose of them somehow, it's best to shake hands with them before you turn your back and destroy them. before you jump ship to the competitor and destroy them. How about that? Somebody else says, never use your current manager or anyone in your management hierarchy as a reference. No company will expect that. No company will expect that or accept that. I don't fucking know. No company will expect that. It says, nothing good can come of that. Job offers can fall through. I'm not so sure what they mean by job offers can't fall through unless they're talking about a manager or that hierarchical supervisor sabotaging your job offer if you ask them to be a reference. But I think that goes back to I think that speaks more so to you as a professional and the company that you keep, and to them also as a colleague, whether or not they can give you a good reference. One last comment here says, I would start using as much up as you can now. With my previous employer, we needed the vice president's approval for any PTO requests over one full-time work week. With my current employer, we need vice president's approval, and that's after the direct manager, and then the direct manager approval. So after the direct manager, then HR manager approval, they would still need the VP approval for any PTO requests over 2 full weeks. And I get it. They don't want employees taking 2+ consecutive weeks of time off, since someone else will have to do their job in their absence, and or it'll take a while for the employee taking all that time off to get caught back up when they return. I know when I returned from maternity leave, that was 16 weeks total, they say, I asked for 1 or 2 days for admin tasks so I could get through and clean up my inbox, learn any of the new policies and procedures, etc. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, depending on what kind of bridges you want to keep, right? If you don't want to burn your bridges, I think taking 6 weeks of PTO and then coming back, or taking 6 weeks of PTO. No, what if you shaved it down to like 4 weeks of PTO, and then the last 2 weeks you come back and give your 2 weeks notice so you could jump ship to another company? It's gonna look rather unprofessional because you've been there for such a long time, accruing all of this PTO. You take a huge chunk of time off. I would say almost an unreasonable amount. If they're not expecting you to come back, if you are not expecting to come back and continue working, taking a month off and then quitting as soon as you get back, it just appears shady and would leave a bad taste in anybody's mouth. Now, that's why I suggest and insist that they go back and read the agreements, find what the policy and procedure is to getting this PTO, to finding whether or not there's a conflict of interest, seeing whether or not there are additional hoops to jump through in order to make it happen, and then do so in a polite and professional manner. It would be in the employee's best interest to do this. Because they're still planning on using their supervisor as a reference. Otherwise, what's the supervisor going to say? You left for a month and then didn't come back, you actually left. You actually gave a 2 weeks notice, which they could have made effective immediately, and then claim you left them high and dry, essentially. So you took you took an extended vacation, and then just left the company, leaving them high and dry. That doesn't sound like too hot of a reference coming from your supervisor, coming from your former supervisor. So there are a couple of details to address there. Really consider and reconsider whether or not you want the supervisor as a reference. Find whether or not it is feasible, whether that PTO is something you want to sacrifice, whether or not the benefit of this new job, maybe it's an increase in salary of some kind, whether it's worth sacrificing whatever unused PTO you have at your former company. I mean, why didn't you take that time off? I mean, is the work culture just that stress-free and that nice? The monies and the benefits are worth it, where you don't feel the need to leave at all for vacation anywhere or even take time for yourself. I mean, it's a lot of paid time off. You want to consider that and find if you could leverage it somehow to the benefit of your employer. If money is well, hold on. If money is the motive, right? What if you are able to leverage it somehow in a nice manner? You could maybe not have potential job offers coming your way and instead introduce those job offers as a bargaining chip to your current employer. And you could potentially get more money out of them, get more benefits out of them, and begin using that PTO in a productive manner, in a pleasurable manner, right? So you don't leave the company having lost PTO, because that is effectively time that you've accrued with a show of loyalty and a show of productivity at your current employers. That is also an option, but again, I'm not here to. I mean, I'm just here to give you like a skeletal outline of sorts. If you want to flesh it out, then you have to reach out to us on some corporate cowboy shit. And you can do that online, dropping us some mail, and we can get in touch. We can get in touch. The rates are reasonable, and we keep it professional. Until the next time, have a nice one.